So when Corey asked me to speak on the subject of church renewal, I assumed that I knew something about renewal because of the situation that we had faced at our church at Emmanuel Presbyterian in Bothell, where 6 years ago we had 60 people in worship, and today we have about 120 people in worship on average. So I figured Corey wanted me to come and talk to you about what the key to our success was. And so today what I want to do is I want to give you that formula, that secret for our success, and I want to tell you exactly what you need to do in order to grow your church and to renew it in this way. The first thing you need to do is to get the school district, of which the elementary school next door to you is a part, to out of the blue offer you $120,000 for a strip of land at the southern border of your property that you're not really needing because you have 3 acres of property as it is already, and so they buy that property from you. The second thing you do is you take that $120,000 as seed money, that windfall, that net profit that you have made through no exercise of your own, and you use it as seed money for a project of tearing down and decaying buildings and building a brand new building using your existing sanctuary. And then the third thing, and this is the most important thing that I need to tell you to do, and that's engineer a national financial crisis caused by the failure of mortgage-backed securities. And that in turn creates a recession that allows you to build the building that you want to build at a substantially reduced price because all of the contractors are out of work and are just wanting to have work, and you're there to offer it to them. And then make all of this happen just before the community in which you sit starts growing like a weed and young families are flocking to your neighborhood like you can't believe because the housing is more affordable for them than where they're currently living and trying to buy a home. Also, hire a pastor who has just finished 17 years at a regional megachurch, who has a relationship with folks who live near the church, Emmanuel Church, and who are realizing that it's probably better to go to church somewhere closer to home, and so they start coming to the church. And then once these new families and these new people start coming to the church, let them experience the already welcoming environment that's in place there that you had nothing to do with as pastor in helping to create. It's just that they're good at hospitality. So voila. Do those things and you've got renewal. You've got the formula to make it all happen. And so what I want you to do is watch for our upcoming seminar that's being advertised, and we'll share all the secrets for a deal of a price, and you'll get a nice notebook and an inspiring video to show your congregation. Come on. Is renewal something that we can engineer? I don't think so. My experience tells me it's more of an accident than the result of an intention. Something that happens in the fullness of time, just like the way in which God sent forth his Son in the fullness of time. Because the lasting, enduring, sustained growth of a church happens because people make it there and make it happen and make it to church because they're hungry and growing children of God who need to be fed in order to sustain their life with Jesus Christ. And yet, over and over and over again in the church, we're driven by our anxiety about what we are not, who isn't present in our midst, and what we are not doing to attract them. And we dedicate ourselves to the work of trying to appeal to a vast and fickle market of religious consumers in order to attract and retain our share of this particular market. I just drove by a church not too long ago on Father's Day, and there was a sign out in front of the church that said, "Free maple bars and bacon on Father's Day." We're bribing people to come to church. And if they do come, if we're even the slightest bit successful in marketing the church and getting them to come to our church, then what we do is we enlist their help in the great cause of sustaining the church. And indirectly, and perhaps unintentionally, we teach them that their discipleship is best expressed in the work of running the church. A few years ago, I acquired my great-grandmother's Bible. And in that Bible, she was born in 1876, and in that Bible there was a little calling card from her pastor, a man by the name of M.L. Smith. She lived in LaGrange, Illinois, and Pastor Smith was the pastor of 3 yoked parishes, the Mount Zion, the St. John, and the Union Parish of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in LaGrange. And this card has on it his name and wishing people a Happy New Year. It was the thing that he would probably deposit on their doorstep or give to them after calling upon them. But on the back of the card is the most interesting thing. It shows me that this work of trying to get people to primarily express their discipleship through building the church and supporting the church is not something that's new to our generation at all. Because back in the late 19th, maybe early 20th century, Pastor Smith handed out this card, and on the back of it, it says, "My duty to my church." And here's what he's inviting his parishioners to do, to express that duty to their church. Pray for her pastor, attend all her services, give to her support, work for her success, practice her teachings, pray for her prosperity, invite others to her services, cordially greet her members. Come on, ML. Really? Really? Is this really what sustains the Church of Jesus Christ? I don't even see any mention of Jesus in the list, except maybe the implication of practice her teachings. And is duty to the church the food that sustained my great-grandmother at this stage of her life when she was the mother of 2 young daughters? So rather than talk about renewing the church, I think we should be talking about the transforming power of Jesus Christ in people's lives. For my part, I'd rather talk about what I've learned in 35 years of ministry to people in the church, and what I've primarily learned is that those people have really interesting lives. Lives that take them into all sorts of exciting and confusing corners of their world, and that they spend most of their lives somewhere other than in the church. And that's what ultimately keeps the church going, is when they need the church more than the church needs them. What keeps the church going is not their duty to their church, but their need for the bread of life and living water. It's that need that sustains their faith in a world that, for the most part, doesn't share that hunger and thirst. They need a place and a people to help them sustain the joyous and confusing and encouraging and exhausting journey that they're on as disciples of Jesus in their world. I've recently come across a book by Alan Roxburgh, and it's a book called the title of the book is Joining God, Remaking the Church, Changing the World, the New Shape of the Church in Our Time. And Roxburgh has something to say about this subject that I'm talking about here, and the need to ask God questions rather than church questions. And what he says right in the introduction is we need to lay down and turn away from questions about how to fix the church or make it effective again, and embrace a different kind of question. How do we discern what God is doing ahead of us in our neighborhoods and communities and join with God there? Roxburgh gives us a guide. We won't find new life for the church by trying to create it and manufacture it within our walls. We'll experience it as we notice and join in on the new things that God is doing in our part of the world, in our neighborhood. And I think there's 2 scriptural allusions that come to mind for me as I think about how to act on what Roxburgh is saying. One is a picture of ministry in the world, and the other is a description of our ministry within the church to one another. The first one is John 4, picture of our ministry within the world and to the world. It's the story of Jesus' encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well. And Jesus leads the way, I think, in showing us how to go about noticing and participating in God's work. And the first thing that I love about this story is that God's work is taking place in a place where no one expects God's work to be taking place. A well in the middle of the day in Sychar, a city in Samaria, between a Jewish man and a Samaritan woman. There just isn't any chemistry there that one would expect to work for ministry to be effective. As John himself tells us, Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Jewish men especially have no dealings with Samaritan women. But there is this woman, and there is Jesus in the middle of the day at a time where no one else is gathering water, both of them thirsty, and they start talking about water. It's the middle of the day with no one else around. It's Samaria, where Jewish man and a Samaritan woman gather, but two people are there united by a common bond, which is their thirst. And they end up, interestingly enough, talking about a thirst greater than just the thirst in their throats as they want water. And as they get into that discussion of that greater thirst, what happens to the woman is that she feels a little too vulnerable, and she diverts the conversation, and she changes the subject to religion. Specifically to ecclesiology, to where and how you ought to worship. And a great way to hide is to hide in the context of church talk. And even in this story, we see it. But Jesus brings her back around to the real issue. And the real issue is that this woman is isolated and lonely. And he promises her something that if she drinks it, it will well up within her and give life to the world. And she hears that, and she responds to it, and she runs back into the community from which she's isolated and estranged, and she says, "Come and see the man who told me everything I ever did." Ministry isn't primarily about trying to create and sustain something. It's primarily about being a part of what God is already doing. And in order to stay attentive to this in our world, we absolutely need one another. And this is where the ministry within the church, to the church, comes. And my favorite passage describing the work of the church, I think if we had just Hebrews 10:19 through 25 by which to order the church, we'd have enough. I think it's one of the most brilliant ecclesiological passages in the entire Bible, because it gives us such a clear and distinct picture of who we are and what we do within the church. And so the writer says this, Hebrews 10:19 and following. "Therefore, my friends, since we have confidence to enter the sanctuary by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us approach with a true heart, in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water, and let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. And let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." We need the church, and we need the church for the reasons set forth in this text. We need the church to be rooted and grounded in the confession of our hope, to reorient our lives, to reroot our lives and our identity, and to draw near to God in worship. Because as we hold fast to that confession of our hope, as we worship God, we remember who we are. And we need one another, and that's the other thing that happens within the church, fellowship. Koinonia, that common life together. We make use of the gift of our common identity in Christ, and we meet together, and we stir up one another to love and good works as we encourage one another. We get together. We get together to have those important conversations that grow out of the God questions that we're asking and the God questions that are raised in the day-to-day lives that we live in those other 6 days. And so we're sustained as we're sent back out into our world to follow Jesus and to participate in God's renewing work. I want to circle back around to the question from the beginning. Because the real question is not how did Emmanuel get to where it is? How did it grow? Why is it experiencing renewal? What did we do? But the real question is, now that we're here, now that we've experienced this gift of growth, what are we going to do to steward the gifts that God has given us? And I guess if I'm to be honest about what I believe as a pastor, and especially the pastor of that particular congregation in this particular time, if I'm to be honest, I do have what I believe is a formula for continued church renewal. What I want to work toward. What I want to ask God for. And primarily that's for a congregation of people for whom one question is never far from their consciousness. Who, whether they are at home with their family, at work, at school, out in their neighborhood, in the grocery store shopping, wherever they are, that they're asking one simple question. Lord, how are you at work here? And how can I be a part of it?